Hi, Zizaran here with another Ultimatum League starter for 3.14, and with this time we have help from Steelmage and we brought you a Steel Slam Ground Slam build. So this should be really good, kind of similar to the old Slammer that we used to do with the Impaler, but we're playing on a Berserker. This should have an insane amount of damage and still a pretty good tank, especially really good for those of you that like softcore. Insane damage. It looks really fun and should just decimate everything. So for playing this build, you're going to be using a lot of war cries. And well, you can see in the background here that it is slamming everything quite nicely. And remember, for the one that we're displaying right now, we don't even have the empowered Vaal ground slam yet, which is going to be absolutely huge and deal an insane amount of damage. Currently, Vaal ground slam in the game isn't even affected by war cries, so it's going to be completely insane for killing bosses. Now, you might be wondering, how do exerts work and how do I play this build? So an exerted attack is basically an empowered attack. So if I use Intimidating Cry and I use Seismic Cry, you can see that there are numbers here that are appearing on both of the skills. That means that the next 3 attacks is empowered by Intimidating Cry, and the next 5 is empowered by Seismic Cry. Intimidating Cry is pretty straightforward, it's just increasing the overall damage for each attack. However, Seismic Cry is getting more damage the smaller the number is. That means that if it's looking like this, where you have Intimidating Cry with whatever number and Seismic Cry with 1, that hit is going to be a very large one. So that's how the exert mechanic works. That does mean that you want to get it into a nice rotation and make sure you're keeping your war cries up a lot. Obviously, we're a Berserker, so we are benefiting a large amount from war cries, and it's helping us with stuff like rage generation as well. The build does have a lot of buttons. You're going to have your war cries, you're going to have your ground slam, you're going to have your Vaal ground slam, so generally for bosses, you can just unleash with your Vaal ground slam, and you'll also have Vaal Ancestral Warchief to just unleash on bosses and nuke them down quickly. So, as normal, we're using the Path of Building community forks, so make sure you have that version to follow along. We have the skill points here, so you can follow along easily, and it shows you when to take each point, and the ascendancy points are included in this as well, so it's easy to see which ones you take at what point. So we have one version with cluster jewels and one without. It should be very easy to follow everything in League Start as well. And the cluster jewels we're using is Lead by Example, which obviously keeps your onslaught up all the time. And we have Cry of Wolf. This means that your war cries will always count as having enemies nearby, and that's really important for the build. And you also get additionally exerted attacks damage. So this is great for what we're doing. So obviously this build is a little bit more squishy than what a lot of people like to do on hardcore. Some things that make it take more damage is, for example, Aspect of Carnage, just straight up 10% increased damage taken. And we have the new Defy Pain mechanic. So this is a little bit scary, and it's the last one. It's your Uber Lab that you put in. And let's talk a little bit about how this works. So you gain Defiance for 10 seconds whenever an enemy hits you, and you can't get more than one every 0.3 seconds. And the Defiance decks give you a bunch of armor, and they're giving you Leech. Now, whenever this hits 10, you take reflected physical damage equal to max life, and then lose all the Defiance. So, if you had no mitigation and no fist reflect reduction, you die, literally, outright. However, obviously, this is most likely going to get mitigated by armor and percentage fist reduction, so you aren't going to get outright killed. And we're actually going to try to get reflect immunity for this. So there's a few ways to achieve this. It's important to mention that the build uses the Pantheon of Solaris, but very importantly, the Soul of Yugul. This is 25% reduced reflect damage, which is obviously very important here. Other than that, we're also making sure that before taking this ascendancy point, we're doing risk awareness. Risk awareness being a very great name here. But this is putting us even closer, putting us at 80% fist reduction. And now we need 2 jewels with the implicit 10% reduced reflect from physical damage, and we are completely immune to reflect. This means that you can do fist reflect maps, and this is never going to cause us any harm anymore. Now, skills wise, early on it should be very clear to follow. You're using Splitting Steel, and you can use Smoke Mine early on. Obviously, a Marauder doesn't get Flame Dash early on, but if you have a friend to buy it for you, being able to use Smoke Mine and Flame Dash feels pretty good early. We have some utility skills here, and everything should be fairly easy to follow. And in the late game, remember that Earth Shatter, Earthquake, and Ground Slam are pretty much interchangeable. So if you feel like you like one more than the other, it's not going to be a very big change. In the items, we have 2 gear sets. And you can see that the damage is pretty insane with only a 540 DPS axe And if we get a really proper endgame one, almost 13 million damage. So we've got a lot of options here and some examples of gear that you would like to get. Belly of the Beast is definitely good early. And try to make sure that you're getting some sort of physical damage leached as mana. This can make it easy to drop a mana flask early. So you can either get that on a Viridian Jewel, or you can grab the mana leech node over here. And you could also just use an enduring mana flask. Now, Soul Tether has gotten a nerf in the upcoming patch. However, it's still going to be really, really good. The only thing that's affected is the energy shield leech part of it. The life leech portion that we're still taking for, basically Slayer Overleech, is completely unaffected and the same as before. So that makes it still an insanely good choice for survival. For further mitigation, we're going to do some things like Fortify effect, and obviously we get a large tank from Berserk. But maintaining Berserk for a very long time, now that Chainbreaker is being so heavily nerfed, is obviously very hard. And we are using Lethal Pride, but we're not going to be picking up Chainbreaker. It did get nerfed a little bit too hard for this build, at least in the initial stages. But a Lethal Pride can give you a large amount of strength, a large amount of things like Fortify effect, and also lots of like good damage things. We're also going to be using the Lord of Steel Jewel. And basically, this is going to be very similar to the old Slammer I did, where you were doing like the Coal of Steel suck. So you have one steel skill in just to give you the Coal of Steel, and you can go around, hit once, and then do the Coal of Steel, and that should clear most white monsters. Obviously, it's not going to be anywhere near the damage that we used to have with the old Impaler Keystone, but it doesn't really work the same way anymore. It should be more than enough for clearing, and you have an insane tactical nuke with your Vaal Ground Slam and your Vaal Ancestral War Chief for bosses and rare monsters. Rapid expansion is obviously very nice. It gives you more of an angle and also gives you endurance charges for increased tank. We have additional information here in the notes, so make sure you check that out if you are struggling on anything, and it should be pretty easy to follow. So obviously Flesh and Stone has been increased in mana reservation now, so mana is a little bit tricky on the build. Endgame, you can actually drop Champion of the Cause if you have it Enlightened and your mana feels fine without it. Are there too many gems to equip for the build? There shouldn't really be like too much like intensity on sockets, and obviously you can very easily drop everything to do with Vaal Ancestral Warchief or damage scaling gems for that if you need to. Can the player have mana issues? Definitely. We have the choices of obviously a mana flask or an enduring mana flask. Physical damage leaches mana, and we also have the leech mana nodes on the tree if you can't get any other option. Useful leveling uniques. There are a bunch of really good weapons, like for example the Cauterizer is an insanely good weapon early on if you're able to get it. You get this through a prophecy thing and you have to upgrade Limb Split basically. This one's really good, and other than that I would recommend your normal things like Gold Rim, Wanderlust, etc. Carnage Heart is also pretty good early and it helps you with all the stats that you could possibly need. As far as sustain and leech and quality of life defenses on this build, it's got a decent amount of tank just from Fortify and Berserk, especially with Berserk being up, you are very tanky. You've got Slayer Overleech from Soul Tether. It is slightly less tanky than a champion however, but you do get pretty much double the damage of a champion. So as far as special mechanics that make this build work, obviously you are going to have to get used to rotating Warcries, and it is a pretty button intensive build, so make sure that you're ready for that before getting into the build. As far as financial hurdles for the build, everything should be pretty cheap. This is a pretty great build to do on Soul Self-On, especially with Harvest being easy to craft a lot of these weapons. Make sure you look into things like being able to fracture a really high physical damage roll on a weapon, and then using further Harvest crafting like physical damage reroll. Should be really good for getting yourself an easy like 600-700 PDPS weapon. Good luck in the upcoming Ultimatum League, and I hope this build guide helps with that. Let me know in the comments down below how you feel, and go make sure to thank Steelmage and give him a follow. He's a really good content creator. Sub if you liked the video, and remember I'm going to be live on Twitch pretty much every day, so drop by if you have any questions. But more importantly, try to die less than I do.